Does citizenship have worth anymore? That is the topic of tonight's byline. Well, it does for me, and it likely does for you, but some people seem to see no difference between citizens and non-citizens. Toronto City Council voted the other day on a motion that asks the province for legislations to allow non-citizens to vote in municipal elections. Now, if you're sitting in Corner Brook, Kenaston, or Prince Rupert, you might be wondering, why should you care about this? You wisely don't live in Toronto. The answer is simple. Toronto is the fourth largest city in North America, the largest in Canada, and what starts there will spread. Lefty councillor Joe Mahavik, well, he calls this an idea an expansion of how democracy functions in the city. Mahavik said it was all about saying Toronto is an inclusive city. I don't know what this has to do with inclusive unless he thinks the citizens of his city are all white men who belong to the Orange Lodge and march around in bowler hats. Well, who knows? Maybe he's right. Here's how Mahavik actually defended his vote to let non-citizens cast a ballot in city elections. Quote, I think it's going to shift the politics to make it more immigrant-friendly. And guess what? 46% of Torontonians were not born in this country, never mind in this city. And they're going to start to feel a growing sense of ownership of the political agenda here at City Hall. See, here's the thing, though. He's right. Nearly half of Toronto's residents were born out of the country, but the overwhelming majority of them can vote because they bothered to take the steps necessary to become citizens. My parents weren't born here. Most of the kids that I hung around with in elementary and in high school, well, their parents weren't born in Canada either. Guess what? They became citizens. People from Croatia, the Philippines, Kenya, England, neighbors from Jamaica, Poland, India, they all became citizens and voted. They knew that Canadian citizenship meant something. Apparently, more than half of Toronto City Council doesn't believe there's any worth in Canadian citizenship. And it's questionable whether Ontario's premier believes that citizenship has worth either. She says she's intrigued by this idea.
You know, I think it's very interesting that the City of Toronto is exploring ways of engaging people in the democratic process. I think that it makes a lot of sense to look at different options. So we haven't had a specific request at this point, but I think it's really commendable that they're looking at different possibilities.
This idea is being pushed as accepting of immigrants by people like Debbie Douglas. She's the executive director of the Ontario Council for Agencies Serving Immigrants. Here's what she told the Toronto Red Star. Quote, we're very pleased that Toronto is once again leading the country in terms of progressive policies. Progressive policies, that's the key. It seems most progressives don't see a value in citizenship. They slough it off as some kind of imperialist rubbish from a bygone era. I don't, and I'm not alone. Writing in that same Toronto Red Star, the very progressive columnist Thomas Walcombe wrote this: I think Canada is a real place, not just a convenient stopover on the way to somewhere else. And if Canada is a real place, then Canadian citizenship means something serious. Walcombe and I don't agree very often, but we're standing shoulder to shoulder on this. Do you value your citizenship? Whether you were born here or sought out Canadian citizenship through immigration, do you place a high value on what it means to be Canadian? I think most Canadians do. But like on so many issues, there's a disconnect between the elites at the top and the little people. They see us as so simple-minded in thinking that casting a ballot to determine the direction of our city, province, or country, that should be left to those who have sworn allegiance to Canada, that have taken the time to say, here I stand, this is my home. If you can't be bothered to say that, if you can't be bothered to take that stand, then you shouldn't be allowed to vote. Period. And that's the byline.
How hard is it to become a Canadian citizen? Is it hard? Or are some people just willing to throw it out there and let people vote just because they have landed in our country?
Yeah, that's right.
Does this make sense, Madam Speaker? Or is it just me?
Yes,
It's just me.
I know it is.
I don't think so. I think it's the majority of Canadians.
I do as well. I think it's the majority of Canadians. Well, let's ask a man that's not Canadian but lives and works in Toronto and came to this city of his own accord. Well, kind of. I think his wife had a say in it. Simon Kent joins us now from Toronto.
She has signed a lot of things.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. No. I call all the shots single-handedly at my house. Simon, does this bother you, this idea that you need to be a citizen of a country to vote in it?
I think it's a splendid idea because citizenship gives privileges and it gives rights, but ultimately it's up to Canada to decide about its citizenship requirements. And I think at the moment it's a 3-year permanent residency period, and after that you can apply and become a citizen, then you can vote. It's really easy and it's really straightforward, and it's totally non-discriminatory. Anyone can fill out the forms. Anyone can go along and become a citizen, and once you're a citizen, you get that wonderful Canadian passport, you get all the privileges and all the things that go with that, and you can vote. I really don't know why Kathleen Wynne is really trying to get involved in this argument, because she's in more trouble than Custer politically. She's got a lot of things on her plate, and this is just a pointless argument.
Well, I think that she's agreeing to this and putting it forward. Well, it's put forward by Toronto City Hall, let's be fair, but she's willing to talk about the idea and get chatter going about it in the public because she is in so much trouble. But this originated with the folks at Toronto City Hall. I've heard people talk about it at other levels of government as well. And it's always about, let's be inclusive, as if we're not inclusive in who we grant citizenship to now.
And that's a very good point. I mean, I think Canada would have to be one of the most generous countries in the world with its immigration program. I think the last number I saw was almost, I think, 250,000 people every year come to this country, and that program has been running for 10 years. And these people are coming into Canada, and Canada is opening its arms, and Canada is so generous. And I have to admit, I'm one of them. I came here with my wife and family. My wife is Canadian, and after 20 years, wanted to come home, and I respect the rules of this country. And I think Canada has a right to frame its rules, its constitution, and its citizenship requirements as it sees fit. I don't see that as a point of argument.
Let me throw this in at you. One of the things that Kathleen Wynne said, and I think she's going to give the City of Toronto the powers to do this as a, continue talking about it as a distraction from her other problems. But she said, well, there was a time when non-citizens could vote. And she pointed that her mother was born in the Bahamas and was a British subject and therefore was allowed to vote. Well, when I was very young, my parents were allowed to vote before they were Canadian citizens because they too were British subjects. You, under those rules, would have been allowed to vote because we all shared the same sovereign. You as a native Australian could have voted. So, but we changed that in the 70s. We said, no, you can't just be a British subject anymore. You must be a Canadian. I think she's trying to confuse the issue because there is a difference between being a British subject and therefore there were special rules in the past and opening up to anybody that happens to land in the country.
Very good point, Brian. Very good point. And she's conflating two different issues. You're quite right about being a member under the British sovereign, which I guess would mean a Commonwealth country these days, or whether or not you're from anywhere in the world. No matter where you're from, what your religion or what your background, you can access Canadian citizenship. I think that's really fair. I don't think we should look to the past. And if this is a robust discussion and a robust debate that must be had, let's have it. But let's have it on honest terms and on honest conditions.
One of the things that we hear about is the Canadian government has a responsibility to Canadian citizens overseas. So if somebody goes overseas, gets in trouble, they traveled on a Canadian passport.
Right.
They've got to, they should be stepping in, doing something, consular services, trying to get them help, trying to get them home. Well, if we allow people that aren't citizens to vote, then I think the next step is, well, why don't we just give Canadian passports to people that are non-citizens? Why? And then, well, you've got to go get them out of trouble. They live in Toronto. Well, but they're in Lebanon and they're citizens of Lebanon, so we'll let the Lebanese go. No, but they live in Toronto. It will become that sort of argument, and it will devolve to where, as that, I believe it was Jan Martel, the Canadian author, said, well, we're just the greatest hotel in the world. I happen to see the country as much more than a great hotel. I agree with you.
This country is a lot more than that, and on so many levels. It sets so many examples to the rest of the world and how its inclusiveness. And it's a spurious argument to say Canada could be made more inclusive by changing these rules or changing the voting rules and changing access to citizenship. How much more inclusive can you get in Canada? I'd challenge anyone to pick out any other country in the world that has done more than this country to be inclusive, to be open to everyone, and to give so many wonderful benefits of belonging and of privilege.
Let's be fair. Maybe Australia. But that's a topic for another
perhaps. This is not the time or place for that debate. But you know what I'm saying. I think it's a spurious debate. Canada has done such a great job of inclusiveness despite the naysayers. And you talked before about people who live in other countries and then demand help. I mean, to become a citizen is a very important thing. It's a big decision, and you take that decision as a conscious adult or as a minor, as a child with your adults' help. I think it's something that should be taken seriously, and it's not something that should be given away easily. You do earn it. There's a mutual trust. There's a mutual understanding, and I think Canada's quite right to make people wait a few years, and it's something you earn, and once you've earned it, you see there's people very proudly at immigration queues from all around the world holding their Canadian passport. They're very proud of that, and so they should be.
All right, Simon, great talking to you, and let's see what the audience thinks. We'll ask them to email us, byline@sunmedia.ca.